I found a great guest to interview as the 49ers open training camp. Jim Cotta was the head strength and conditioning coach of the Lakers during their glory years at the turn of the century. That meant that he worked closely with Shaq and Kobe and saw the genius of Phil Jackson up close. Jim has also worked with prominent NFL players, including 49ers Hall of Fame receiver Terrell Owens. Nowadays, Jim is based in Nashville, where he works with another Bay Area sports legend. That's former Giants manager Bruce Bochy. Anyway, for obvious reasons, the start of 49ers camp is the perfect time for a deep discussion with an expert in the field of sports training. The NBA also happens to be coming off a tumultuous season of injuries. We saw Steph Curry, Tyrese Halliburton, and Jason Tatum all go down at absolutely critical times, while health is the 49ers' ultimate key as camp does begin. So you can bet we got into some key insight on Christian McCaffrey and the entire prepare to play process while we talked to Jim. Our conversation kicked off with the wild world of off-season work for professional athletes and their often insane training workloads.
And so that adds up. I mean, even though it's just shooting jump shots, every time you jump, you're putting wear and tear on your Achilles or your knee or whatever. I mean, there were times where I had to tell Kobe, like, do you really, he'd be the last one to leave the gym. And I'd be like, his knee was bothering him. And he's like, no, I need to get up another 100, you know? And I was like, you really think that's going to be good for your knee? We got a game tomorrow, you know? But, you know, he was
Would you ever win that argument with Kobe?
No, never. Not a chance.
He'd go for 200 after you told him only 100.
I mean, you know, he might have heard me and maybe, you know, but he would never say like, oh, you know what, you're right. So, you know, that's why I felt like saying it once in a while, like, you know, hey, maybe you should get some
rest. But I will counter with this, because I want to get into Christian McCaffrey, who I think is probably wired similarly to Kobe Bryant, and all these greats are. Availability ends up being the best ability.
Correct.
So these guys, you know, I get it that they want to work as hard as possible because that's how they get to the Hall of Fame level in the first place. But at some point, it's a balance, right? And at some point, if they work too hard, if they overwork themselves and they get hurt, that's going to hurt their legacy too. So somebody like Kobe, somebody like Christian McCaffrey, you know, we'll talk about George Kittle, Steph Curry. You're dealing with these athletes. You dealt with Kobe, you dealt with Shaq. There's got to be some kind of governor that does kick in, even if they don't like to admit it, right?
Yep. And where it's gotten hard is so the world of sports performance outside of the people working for professional sports teams has become a big business. And so these players are all going out and seeking experts in the field. Instead of saying, okay, I'm going to stay at the 49ers training camp all year and work out with their strength and conditioning coach or their therapist or whatever, they're going and seeking out the best speed training expert, the best rehab expert, and then they might not be on the same page as the team's staff. So you have this disconnect of, especially someone coming back from an injury, of you've got the athletic trainer, physical therapist, team doctor, but then, and I know because I've been on the receiving end of that, or I've seen it both when I've been working for a pro sports team, and then recently when I get players that have a specific injury and they reach out to me or their agent reaches out to me, and I feel like, hey, are you communicating this to the team that you're on, that you're doing this with me? Because we don't want to do too much here, and I think there's a big disconnect there. So, I mean, I know there's a lot of great trainers out there that, especially these NFL guys, they tend to go to and they spend a month or two with them, and then they report to training camp, and then they're working with a different strength conditioning coach or different trainer. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect there, especially when coming back from injuries. And so I think that's one of the problems now. And the star players in the NBA, they can dictate that to the team. They can say, no, I'm working with this guy. I'm not working with the team's strength and conditioning coach. I have my own guy that I'm paying, and that's what I'm doing. And so these teams kind of have to curtail to that because they're like, well, we want to keep this player. We're paying him $50 million a year. So we're going to let him do what he wants to do. And that's a problem. So, maybe the team is monitoring a player's workload, but then they're in the off season, he goes and he's doing his thing with his, personal strength coach, and maybe they're working out 3 times a day and whatever. Maybe that's too much. And then they come to training camp and maybe they're not as fresh as they should be. So that's a really hard thing for pro sports teams to monitor. And it's baffling when, you see someone in training camp in the first week of training camp, they're suffering an injury, a soft tissue injury especially. So I'm sure you see that a lot with the football. Training camp, you see guys being held out all the time. Like, hey, it's week 1, and you're like...
It's really early. It's to the point where the overuse definitely wasn't happening in training camp. They haven't even hit the pads yet sometimes.
Right. And so, it's baffling to, someone like yourself who's reporting on it, and you're like, okay, like, what did this person do all off season to show up in the first week he's got a hamstring pull? Or maybe it's something that it's been problematic, whatever the injury was, shoulder injury, knee injury, whatever, hip. And week 1, they're out with that same thing. It's like, did you rehab it properly? But so I think sometimes those things are, the team probably is like, well, he wasn't working with us the whole offseason.
Yeah.
He was doing his thing with his guy. Like this basketball player that brought me in had 6 or 7 different people. So he was coming back from his injury, trying to make it back. 6 or 7 different people, including myself, that were not really communicating with each other on what we're doing with him. And then there was the team also that he was on. There was no communication between me. And so at one point I said to his agent, I was like, this is too much. Like, he's probably doing too much. In addition to doing on-court basketball work and working with another trainer and then doing the stuff that I was doing with him. And it was like 7 or 8 different people. And I was like, I told the agent, I'm like, that's a problem. He really needs to probably just be working with one person. So that one person, I got good at kind of, again, we didn't have the workload monitoring when I worked for the Lakers, but I saw these individuals, players, every day. I knew how many minutes they played. We just kind of ballparked it. We were like, hey, Shaq played 40 minutes last night. He's really tired today, I can tell. Let's give him the day off from practice.
So it used to be much more of a gut feel kind of thing.
And Phil Jackson was great at that.
He had the whole Zen thing going on, so he probably was able to read guys. And
he was good. And when he came to the Lakers, they had won 6 championships with the Bulls, so very long seasons. So that's another factor. Like, if you go to the championship in June, that's 3 more months added to that the rest of the league didn't play.
So let me ask you this really quickly.
Yeah.
There was 2 3-peats and Jordan playing baseball in the middle of them.
Right, yep.
Did that help the Bulls in a way to get him away from basketball? And, would it have been possible to win 7 or 8 straight championships going that deep every run? Or do you think there was a little bit of a reset button there?
There's a reset for sure. When I was with the Lakers and we won 3 in a row, the staff, the players, everyone, you're smoked because it's a shorter off season now. And then it's all the fanfare and expectations around you, and just physically and mentally, it's a grind. Let
me give you this. This ties into the 49ers.
Yeah.
They played an NFL high 60 games in 3 seasons, but they did not have the benefit of winning a championship because they either lost an NFC championship or the Super Bowl.
Yep.
So the Chiefs also played 60 in that 3-season stretch.
Right.
But I think, and you were on the title winning side of this with the Lakers. I think, you get worn down and it's really tough, but at least you won the title because that gives you that wind at your sails. Could you even imagine the psychological impact that the 49ers probably had to go through not winning and going through such a long season?
Yeah. You make it that far and then lose, and then you might lose a player. And then psychologically, you're like, we gave it everything we had. We did the best we could. And now we're out one of our great players that was part of that. Mm-hmm. And then you're probably just like, I don't know if I can do this.
That
again.
makes 6-11 last season probably make a whole lot more sense when you look at that.
Yeah, I mean, and we mentioned McCaffrey earlier. They started off the season probably mentally thinking we've got him, and then all of a sudden they don't for I don't know how many games was it. Yes, when the psychology of having a star player and not having a star player has always been fascinating to me because it does affect the team. Sometimes in a good way. Sometimes people rise to the occasion, like, hey, okay, Shaq's not playing tonight. Like, the other team might even take it easy because they're like, oh, they don't have their star player, so we don't have to play as hard tonight. So people think that psychology doesn't come into it. It certainly does.
With all the focus on Halliburton and Jason Tatum and their serious Achilles injuries, and also the focus on Steph Curry, who obviously didn't suffer as serious of an injury this past season, but still did miss the end of the Warriors' playoff run, we pivoted the discussion to return to play, one of the biggest issues in all of professional sports.
Well, and speaking of grinds, the NBA season is a grind. We saw the Jason Tatum injury, a torn Achilles for the Boston Celtics, and Bay Area fans obviously all talking about Steph Curry, age 37, hamstring injury, essentially ends their season. And all I can think of is, 81 regular season games, 82 regular season games, 82. The Bulls went 72-10. I remember that. And I mean, you were with some really good Lakers teams who were up in the 60s, right? Back in those years. But you have all those games. And then I remember that Steph Curry was lighting it up at the Olympics last summer.
Yep.
So, and Jason Tatum was on the Olympic team as well. He didn't really play nearly as much, but he's still practicing. He's still going through all of the physical exertion, right, over the course of the summer. Do you think these things are tied? We're seeing a lot of these injuries. Are these overuse injuries? How do these guys ensure that they stay healthy at these crucial points of the season?
It's an interesting topic, and there's a lot of different opinions out there as to what's going on, and we can dive deep into this with I think we're seeing it in all sports, but in basketball, a hamstring injury was not something that was seen very often when I worked in basketball. I think I had one player in 7 years that he might have missed a week or two with like a slightly strained hamstring. So I never saw any hamstrings. Obviously in football you see a ton, baseball you see a ton. So part of that is hamstring in particular is multi-directional athletes tend to not have many hamstring injuries, but the straight ahead sprinters, your wide receivers in football are the ones that are guys sprinting from first to second base or whatever. In baseball, that's where you see most of them happen. So I was surprised when I saw Steph Curry with a hamstring. I was also surprised to see him say he's going to be back in a week. Because usually, how many hamstrings do you hear about in football all the time? When you first hear, hey, so-and-so's got a hamstring, you're not thinking he's going to be back next week for a game. It's usually you're thinking 2-3 games maybe sometimes, right? So for them to say he's going to be back in a week, that kind of leads me to believe that he probably could have played. He wouldn't have been 100%, but not sure he would have made it worse or any better. But I found it strange for them to say he can be back in 1 week.
If I remember correctly, I think it was 2019, when the first run of the Warriors dynasty was hitting its end, and we found out exactly when it would hit its end, when Klay Thompson tore his ACL. I believe he was coming back from a hamstring.
Right.
So is it possible that, yes, he could have played, but maybe they said, hey, we don't want to risk a much more serious injury?
For sure.
Yeah.
But, for me, my overanalyzing mind would go, well, what's another day? If you're just giving him a week and you're saying he's going to come back, then what's 1 or 2 more days? He's still got the issue. There's still the risk involved.
So how long would something like that typically take to fully heal, to where the risk would dissipate?
I'd say a month.
Okay.
Like you can't even get to the point where like you're going to test it. Like often with these guys, especially these explosive athletes, like if they have a hamstring, like you're not even getting to the point where you're testing it even slightly until like 2 or 3 weeks into it. Because the last thing you want to do is say, hey, let's go out and see how you're running. And then you say, okay, jog half speed down the court. And they're like, oh, I heard it again. Now you just got set back another week. So they're very cautious with those types of soft tissue injuries because they're like, well, I don't want him to go 100% to try it out. Like, I'm not going to ask him to jump as high as he can to make sure it's okay. And so sometimes the first time that they're really going 100% is when they get back in the game.
Yeah.
Because the trainers and strength coaches and therapists are all afraid, like, hey, I don't want to be the person that set him back in his rehab, in his, comeback process. So you're very, very careful. You might be like, okay, let's try running at 20% today. Next week, let's try running at 30%, and just a slow amp up like that. So that's why it was confusing for.
You bring up a great point, though, that I think a lot of people don't take into account when just the general public is talking about return to play, is the adrenaline involved with actually playing in a game cannot be recreated ever in a practice scenario. I know this. I was a competitive swimmer, and no matter what you did in training, if you hadn't competed in a few months, that first meet back, the second that you hit the water off the start, you could be in great shape, but you'd feel terrible because it's all the nuances that only happen when that adrenaline is pumping. So how is that factored in these return to play situations for professional athletes? Is it just experience because they were hurt at a certain time before?
Yeah. I mean, someone like Steph Curry, you wouldn't worry about someone like that because he's got so much experience.
Yeah.
But someone who's young, who doesn't know how to kind of like control their emotions and
Protect
adrenaline,
themselves.
Yeah, then I would worry about it. Or, especially in a football game, it's like, because if you're a great basketball player, you can be a step slow still and still do well out there just because you're smarter than everyone else, or know where to get your shots. And you can be a step slow. You've seen plenty of aging basketball players that can shoot real well because they're so skilled. So if they lose a step, they can still play. Versus if you're just relying on pure blowing by people and dunking over people, yeah, your hamstring or whatever your injuries better be at 100%. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, even like, watching Luka Doncic play, he's not a very fast guy. And he gets shots off amazingly, but he's one of the slowest. He's one of the slowest players I've ever seen out there. But he's crafty and figures out how to get a shot off.
Jokic with the same thing too. He's not a world class athlete, but the skill that he brings is what makes up.
And so that's why with Curry, obviously one of the most skilled basketball players we've ever seen in history, that I feel like him at 50% could still go out there and do a great job.
Yeah.
So
and that's why his game has aged gracefully, right?
Yeah,
because he's 37 now. And, one thing with Curry, I got down a YouTube rabbit hole a few days ago, and I was watching the 2015, 2016 stuff. The guy was getting swallowed by his jersey. He was so skinny back then. And I still remember the whole baby-faced assassin nickname. And people couldn't believe that somebody of that stature, it was just skin and bones back then. They couldn't believe somebody of that stature would dominate in the NBA.
Yeah.
Now, actually, later in his career, he's muscled up. He doesn't look out of place anymore, right? Yep. So, in a way, even though he's gotten older, he has, I think, a physical advantage that he didn't have when he was in his prime, so to speak.
Yeah. And he did a great job overcoming those ankle injuries that his first 3 or 4 years in the league, he was going out with ankle injuries all the time. And I was like, as a fan watching, I was like, I don't think his career's going to last very long unless he solves that problem.
That was like during the early golden age of Twitter. And there would be parody accounts. I still think they do it now, but it was funnier back then.
Yeah.
You knew that Steph Curry's ankle was an issue when there was a burner account made called Steph Curry's ankle. His ankle deserved it because I still remember, people were talking about it. This is a bust of a draft pick. You used a first rounder on the small school guy who's never healthy. You could have seen this coming because his frame is not big enough to handle. And look how wrong everybody was, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing to look at that in retrospect.
It is. And another thing when we're talking about playoff basketball and injuries, and you can see this in other sports too, is especially sports that are longer, like hockey, you see this too. So they play 82 games. They're never playing at this intense of a level all year. Maybe a couple games where it's a tight game in the last 4 or 5 minutes of the game, they're going, they're giving it everything they have. but not for a full game ever. And then you go into the playoffs, and it's like all of a sudden it's a shift. Like, okay, we're playing defense on every possession. We're diving for balls. We're going for loose balls, like taking charges, all the things that you would like to see basketball players do all the time, but they can't do it for 82 games. So they just dial it back, and then once the playoffs hit, they go full force, and I think you see a lot more injuries.
That makes a lot of sense.
Because their bodies aren't used to that.
Yep.
And so I know there's all the recovery stuff, whatever, and they're doing that during the regular season, but there's nothing that can simulate those types of stresses in the
Playoff
body.
intensity.
And hockey, you see it too. Like, they don't hit each other during the regular season in hockey. Then all of a sudden, the playoffs, they start just. It's like a whole nother game. They're like, oh my God, I haven't seen a team hit each other like this before. And then those are contact injuries that they're getting. But I mean, like we mentioned earlier, the Jason Tatum injury, that brought up a lot of discussion. Obviously, when a star player goes out with a torn Achilles, and it was kind of reminding me a little bit of when Aaron Rodgers went out. But Aaron Rodgers, I can see it because he's a lot older, and so it was probably like, yeah, his Achilles was just ready to go, versus Tatum's in his 20s, and he was just pushing off. There was no contact or anything. So that makes me start to think, like, are these guys doing too much? The work that guys like him and Curry started it all, the amount of work that they put in the gym, yes, we can monitor workloads and all that nowadays, but still, these guys they're basketball gym junkies. Like, you have to kick them out of the gym. Mm-hmm. Like, if 100 shots is good, they're going to take 1,000.
Then came the transition to football, where obviously we focused on the 49ers. Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, both at the center of this discussion entering the 2025 NFL season.
Let's talk a little bit about Christian McCaffrey, because I think this is a fascinating kind of case study to track. Last year during training camp, the Achilles tendonitis flared up.
Yep.
And then he was out for about 6 weeks to 2 months.
Yep.
He was spotted at SFO airport, headed to Germany, a direct flight to Germany. And he never wanted to talk about it publicly, but right. He did suggest that he was leaving no stone unturned in his battle against this Achilles tendonitis. Right. He ended up fully healing from the Achilles tendonitis, or so he said, and he came back. The injury that he suffered after coming back was actually a PCL. It was his knee. It slammed the turf in Buffalo. It wasn't an Achilles. So whatever he did from point A to point B for the Achilles seemed to work. Now he's fully healthy. Yep. Then we learned that George Kittle, 49ers tight end, a couple years earlier also had bilateral Achilles tendinosis, he said. I'm going to ask you about the difference between tendonitis and tendinosis in a second, but just to not lose sight of the big picture. Turned out that Kittle went down to Panama and got stem cell treatment.
Stem cells, okay.
While he had tendinosis, and completely got over it. He's still a Hall of Fame caliber player now. It's not bothering him anymore. So the 49ers have two cases of guys with either tendonitis or tendinosis, in McCaffrey and Kittle, who both have seemed to overcome it. And we'll get the firm test for McCaffrey this year when he comes back.
Yeah, it's interesting.
But, I mean, having dealt with Kobe, he obviously had the full rupture. And having dealt with all these NBA guys, I just wanted to know from afar what your thoughts on this process is.
It's a little fascinating because there's been a big shift in the sports performance world. And I follow some people who are experts in tendons. By no means am I. And I'm trying to learn more. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely like changed the way they're training people. But the research is a little skeptical still. And when they talk about strengthening a tendon, I'm always like, how do you really know? Like, are we doing a biopsy? Like, are we putting someone through a certain program of isometrics and certain types of movements? And then are we doing a biopsy on that tendon? Are we scanning that tendon to see if it got stronger, got bigger, got thicker? I don't think we are. So yes, there is some research out there. I've gone down this rabbit hole a little bit recently just because it's become such a popular thing. Jason Tatum tearing his Achilles in a playoff game. Like, we don't know what what kind of shape his Achilles was in. Like, was it under stress? Was it partially torn already and he didn't know it? I mean, it's impossible to know these things, but it's the occurrence of it seems to be going up over the last 20 years,
Yes.
not down. So now, part of me says, yes, the training portion of it isn't being monitored closely enough. These athletes are going and seeking out other things that, like, if McCaffrey went to Germany, or if tight end Kittle, if he went down to, which now we can do, those shots in the United States, and you can save your stem cells. Before, that's why people were going out of the country, because you couldn't save the stem cells, and now you can save your stem cells. So you can get the stem cells extracted, and then you might have enough to do 4 or 5 shots. So I think a lot of football teams and basketball teams are now adding like a stem cell type doctor to their staff.
So, and that way they don't have to outsource this stuff, so they can keep everything under the same umbrella.
Right. But that's a case where, like, were the 49ers, like, were they the ones saying, yeah, go do this? Or was it the athlete and his team of people, his private people, saying, hey, let's go do this? And so there's that disconnect again. So, and then looking at the amount of volume of training, and I think there's so much out there to do, and it's hard as a strength conditioning coach to say, all right, what's the minimum effective dose I can give an athlete? And I think that's where the field needs to do a better job. Is there's so many tools out there now. There's so much cool stuff. There's a lot of tools in the toolbox, a lot of new equipment, a lot of way to monitor athletes' movements. And so, but it's hard to dial it back. And so, like, if I had a top level, whatever, football player, basketball player, and saying, like, hey, I want to come train with you during the off season. And, they might be like, okay, we're going to train 3 times a day, once in the morning, I'm like, you just went through a long season. Probably training once a day is plenty. Like, let's look at it from the standpoint of coming into the season super healthy. Now, I know football is different because guys are so concerned with their speed. They are so concerned with their 40-yard dash time and their speed and getting a step slow. So they're working with their speed training experts to make sure that doesn't happen. But again, what are we sacrificing? Are we putting too much wear and tear on their body that they're not going to be able to make it through the season? So it's different in football because every game means so much. In basketball, we would look at it like the standpoint of, like, we've got good players. It's okay if so-and-so is a little bit out of shape, a little step slow to start the season, because we know we'll get there, at the halfway point in the season. And so even during training camp, we might not push them that hard because we're like, hey, the last thing we want to do is start the season off with some tendonitis in their knee, or
and that's not going to go away as they continue
right.
working.
We don't have time to shut them down. So it's like, let's not kill them during the preseason, which was something that I noticed when Phil Jackson came on as a coach for the Lakers. I was like, it was very interesting. He was very attuned to that. But because I think it was because of his experience with the Bulls and these long seasons that he realized, like, I'm not going to kill these guys during training camp. What's the point? Like, starting off the season with everyone tired and hurt. And so he was a little easier on them. A lot of players were like, oh, that was an easy training camp. And I'm like, well, how do you feel? Pretty good. Well, that's good.
And that's the goal, right?
Yeah,
You want to feel
we got
physically
a long
ready. Yeah.
season. And I get it. Football's different because, like, every game means so much more.
It's a marathon and a sprint simultaneously.
Yeah.
It's tough. And it's got the highest injury rates. It's the highest contact sport out of these big four, really, even more than hockey, I would say. Yep. So,
but the Achilles thing is fascinating. And I think it can, even all the injuries that we seem like there's a little bit more of nowadays. This is a good go back to a conversation I had with Bruce Bochy. While he was training with me and doing some rehab, we would talk about injuries a lot. And I said, he said to me, he goes, you know what? Part of it is, like, he goes, yeah, we have a team of sports medicine people. They're all super smart. It's great. The guys are doing great training. It's better than it was 20, 30 years ago. But there's more injuries now. Why? And part of it's like, he goes, I don't think guys are willing to play when they're not 100%. So if they're like, yeah, my hamstring hurts a little, and they're worried that it'll affect their next contract, they don't want to go out in the field and be a step slow. They don't want to go out on the mound and they're not at their, instead of throwing 96 miles an hour, they're only throwing 92. And so he goes, I just don't think guys are willing to play with a little bit of an injury.
So
like they
because of that, the reported injury rate is higher.
Is higher. Yep.
Now, but you've also surmised, and I think I agree just on an anecdotal level, that we've seen more of these Achilles, like the serious injuries that you're obviously not faking, maybe even more ACLs. My theory is, and you could debunk this if there's nothing to support it, but maybe we've reached a level of explosiveness in the modern athlete where the muscles have been developed to be these are Ferraris, right?
Yeah.
That this is high performance to where maybe it's overwhelming some of these ligaments, some of these tendons.
I would 100% agree.
Yeah.
There's an injury that I have learned to specialize in because Shaq had it, is these sports hernias. Mm-hmm. And so the expert in that field was a guy named Alex McKechnie. He's now working for the Toronto Raptors. He's from Canada. And he explained it to me one time because we'd seen it in a lot of football players. Terrell Owens had it. I worked with him. Is they get so powerful. Their legs get so powerful, explosive, even their upper bodies, and their core isn't strong enough to hold that all together.
Wow.
And so, these explosive jumpers and, cutting at high rates of speed. And you do that enough times, and if this part of your body, if the core is not strong enough to hold that all together, you're going to start suffering some of these groin, hip flexor, lower abdominal injuries that were misdiagnosed for years. Shaq had it. And
so T.O. had it too.
T.O. had it.
So did you work with T.O. after you worked with Shaq?
Yeah. Actually, I just left the Lakers. So Shaq had it, and he was probably the most famous athlete to have that injury. We brought Alex McKechnie in as a consultant at first, and then he ended up getting hired full time because he was such a tremendous therapist. But he really specialized in the sports hernia, abdominal injury. And Shaq, they can do a surgery for it where they put some mesh in, and I'm not quite sure how they do it. But so that was like the next step. Like no one knew what to do for this injury. All I knew was like he's got to get it stronger. Like that's the basic concept. Like he hurt something, he hurt an area, get it stronger, try to return to play. And it was kind of like an unknown territory. People were like, well, don't do anything with him. The team doctors were like, I'm not sure if we should do anything. We should probably just let him rest. And so he'd rest it for a few weeks. How's it feel? Starting to feel better. He'd go back, try to practice or play. Boom, hurt it again. Did that like 3 or 4 times. Rested for a few weeks, hurt it again. So finally, then we were exploring surgery on that area. And I believe the surgeon was from Canada. And he said, hey, you know what? There's this excellent therapist. Before doing the surgery, maybe you can meet with him and try some of the stuff that he's doing with athletes that have had that injury. So we did that and brought him in, had some phenomenal techniques that I had not seen anybody doing with athletes. And it cured him, it healed him. But he had to continue doing those for the rest of his career, really. There was even times where he would be like, hey, I'm good, man. It feels 100%. And he wouldn't want to do this routine of exercises for a couple of weeks. Then all of a sudden he'd be like,
it popped back up.
He'd come in and he'd be like, damn it. Because I'd be on him. I'd be like, come on, man, we got to keep doing these. He's like, no, I'm good. We're good. It's not going to. And then he'd walk in and be like, God, we got to start doing them again.
Wow.
So anyways.
So that confirms my theory then that there is an injury epidemic or just an injury occurrence that's correlated with how explosive these guys are getting.
It's the reason why. You see these track athletes that are that fast, like they tweak their hamstring all the time because it's just Stuff's moving at such a high rate of speed.
I still, as a swimmer, I don't remember ever hurting when I was really young. And then I remember workouts are really hurting the stronger I got. And then I realized the more muscle you have, the more there is to hurt, more potential pain there is, right? Whatever they call it, lactic acid.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, very similar concept. The bigger and stronger these guys get, the more can go wrong. Right. The more can go right, the more can go wrong.
For sure. And then, another factor, which I think this is a big topic that I hear it talked about in my circles, but not necessarily in the public is, and not so much in football, but I think it's getting there, is what are these guys doing growing up in youth sports? The multi-sport athlete
travel leagues
is lost. And I've witnessed it with my own kids where it's like, let's say one of my daughters, she was playing volleyball and basketball. And it got to the point where when she would play basketball, she was falling behind in volleyball.
Yeah.
And it was easy to see.
She had to pick.
And so now you got to pick. So now you're playing one sport all year. I had another daughter, soccer, all year long. And so that's happening all across the country. And the club sports industry is a huge industry. And they're selling parents on, no, your kid needs to do this all year. And so now and I thought about this years ago. I had a friend, had a son in high school playing basketball. And so he'd play on his high school basketball team and played like 30 games. And then he's playing on an AAU travel team. And it seemed like he was gone every weekend. And I started asking him, I was like, how many AAU games do you get in? And he's like thinking about it. And he's like, okay, we go to this tournament. We played 5 games. Went to that tournament. We played 6. He started adding them up. He got in like 60 or 70 AAU games in addition to his 30 high school games.
Yeah.
Well, that's as much as an NBA basketball player.
But including the playoffs if they're going on a deep run. And this is for young, developing athlete. So
that's across the board that's happening, not just basketball, baseball for sure. I mean, I have some clients that have little kids that are playing, 10, 11, 12-year-old baseball. They're getting in 80 games. They're traveling, they're playing in tournaments, and they're getting in 80 games.
And we're not even getting to the mental burnout aspect of this. The physical burnout's obvious, but I think the mental burnout is something you'll also see.
Yeah. So just looking at it from a purely physical standpoint, so that system that's been growing the last 20 years. I think we're seeing that in baseball, in basketball, where these guys are in their 20s. And since they were 10 years old, they've been playing 80 games a year. And now just the wear and tear on their body wasn't normal when they, growing up. Now, I think the only place where it gets normal for them is when they're in college. Like a lot of these good college baseball programs, they're really smart with their pitchers. They're like, well, we don't want to be known as the college that overthrows kids and hurts their arm. And then
nobody's going to come
no one's going to come there. But that's the only time. And in basketball too, that's the only time where in college, they're playing 40 games, let's say. They're not playing AAU basketball when the college season's over. They're just doing training with the team in a smart way. That's the only period of time that they're getting probably the normal amount of games in. But when they're in middle school and high school, they're getting in way too much. And I think we're seeing that. I think all these shoulder injuries in pitchers in baseball and in basketball, and then, the non-popular sports, it's the same thing, though. The soccer players and volleyball players.
Similar trends that you're seeing there.
There are tons of injuries.
So it's fascinating to me because I graduated high school in 2006, so about 20 years ago. And you've said that this is something that's grown exponentially over the past 2 decades. And I can speak from experience that this was just really, I started the start of it back in 2006, but it still wasn't the norm. Now it definitely is. So what we're seeing is this generation of young athletes that has been the first generation to be fully thrust into all this travel league, AAU stuff, full-time stuff, is maturing into the professional ranks.
Exactly.
And so now we're going to get to see that under the microscope of being a pro athlete. And I was just texting with my buddy the other day who pointed out that, when LeBron came out, and that was the last year of college wasn't required.
Correct. Yeah.
But we used to have, it seemed multiple superstars every year entering the NBA. I think the NBA has a problem now because once Curry and LeBron are gone, it's not like it used to be. Maybe I'm just romanticizing the past, but my buddy we were texting about this. He was saying, I'm going to be bored with NBA after these guys are gone. I don't think that there's the same infusion of spectacular talent that there used to be. And then I asked him, well, why do you think this is? And he said, I think it's because of AAU.
Yeah.
And I don't know where you stand on this. It's just something that was introduced to me a couple days ago. But do you think there's any credibility to that?
I do. But I think it's across all the sports.
Yeah. Okay.
It's across all the sports that you can play year round, and I think that's why football, is in a different category. But now I know some of the local kids around here. They're all playing the receivers and DBs and quarterbacks.
Passing leagues,
These
7 on
passing
7.
leagues. They didn't have that 20 years ago. So now they're playing football year round.
And it's turning into less of a contact sport, a little bit more like basketball and grass due to the rules, right?
Yep.
So,
yep. So I'm seeing like last year, the local high school team that I follow, they're like one of their running backs, he's out for the year, ACL. And I was like, what happened? Like, it was the spring. It was in the spring.
He tore non-contact.
Yeah, in one of these passing leagues. And so now he's not going to be back when the fall starts.
And the vast majority of these ACL and Achilles injuries, maybe all the Achilles injuries, are non-contact to begin with.
They're just cutting or pushing off, and all of a sudden,
which they do in 7 on 7.
Yeah, which that's like when that happens. Like, and I'm not a tendon expert or Achilles expert, but when that happens, when someone's just pushing off, part of me is like, I guess it was time for it to go. Like, there's been that much wear and tear on that Achilles over that person's lifetime that it's just.
Is that what you saw with, I'm remembering now, we talk about Klay Thompson tearing the ACL, I think coming off the hamstring in 19 NBA Finals in Toronto. Is that what you surmised was the case with Durant? Remember he came back in that, what was it, I think it was game 5?
Yeah.
Game 4, game 5.
Yeah, because he was coming back, and they didn't say Achilles. They said ankle or foot, or they weren't, but.
And then he just snapped.
Yeah, and it wasn't on a hard move. Was it on a jump shot, I think?
I think it was on a shot. I think he actually buried the 3 because he was on fire, and then they showed the replay, and you saw the little wave rupture.
I've known non-athletes, just people who've torn their Achilles, they just stepped off the sidewalk, and boom. So it
was time to go.
It's time to go. So Shaq had a very interesting Achilles injury at the end of his career when he was with the Celtics. And when they were evaluating him, it looked like Achilles, but his Achilles was intact. Like, usually you can see.
Yeah.
And but he couldn't jump. He's like, I can't jump off my foot whatsoever. So they tried a bunch of stuff. Nothing was working, and they were baffled. And their team doctor, I guess, was like, well, the only way for me to really see it is for you to cut you open and look. And so he's like, go ahead. And so they go in. So his Achilles was so large that it tore in the middle and was still attached on the outsides. So it didn't elicit that something wasn't there anymore, but it didn't have the reactivity that Achilles needs to have. So that's why he couldn't jump off of it anymore. But they took pictures of it and everything. They're like, this is like going into textbooks,
hanging in the Louvre kind of thing. It's the strongest Achilles ever. Because it won't even rupture when it does.
Usually, if part of the tendon goes, the whole thing is going to go.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. But again, it wasn't like I've asked him. I was like, did you make a move and feel something? He was like, no, it just kind of all of a sudden felt like that. So, anyways, again. Not an Achilles expert, but it seems like it would be an overuse type epidemic that's going on. So kids that are going into the gym, let's say in basketball, and say, they're watching Steph Curry and saying, oh, he shoots 1,000 shots a day, I'm going to shoot 2,000 shots a day. Well, at some point that can catch up with you.
And, a lot of these fans too, they'll look at it on the outside and they'll be like, oh, Kyle Shanahan's using Christian McCaffrey too many carries a game. But I respond by saying, you guys are only seeing the tip of the iceberg that's above the water. It's not about the 25 carries a game. It's more about the 2,000 cuts that he's doing over the course of a week in the offseason or whatever it is, right? Yeah, that's going to be the overuse.
Yeah, I mean, you got to be, if you're running hills, I saw a video of Derrick Henry running hills with a weighted vest on, and yeah, he's an animal. But at some point, how many of those is too many? I think
and the science is just so inexact, I'm sure, on that at this point, right?
It is because we can't see what's going on.
And we haven't seen an athlete like Derrick Henry ever before. Right. As these athletes, this goes back to as these athletes get bigger, stronger, more explosive, the guidelines for overuse are going to be different, right? It's
Correct.
A different kind of car.
The field changes.
Yes.
What someone can do now, we would have looked at 20 years ago and go, wow, that's way too much or not enough. So it's the science of it. That's what's fascinating, because you could pull in every strength and conditioning coach in the NFL and you would have some very different opinions and philosophies on how to train athletes, how to have them recover properly. And it's constantly changing. And there's more than one way to do things. But for sure, when I got into the NBA, my philosophy went to the area of, if I've got a choice of this exercise and this exercise, and they're very similar in the outcome, but this one's a little bit safer, I was like, okay, Shaq's making $25 million a year. I'm going to choose the safer one.
Yeah.
Because if I get him
protect
hurt,
the investment.
But if he just gets hurt working out, I'm gone. I'm fired. Forget about
protect yourself and the investment.
Forget about how his longevity on the court, but you certainly don't want to get hurt working out.
Yeah.
And you hear about that from time to time. I saw a girl the other day at I won't name the facility. She broke her leg doing some hurdle jumps. And she was a high-level volleyball player. And I was like, was she fatigued? How fatigued? She'd been in there for a while. Mm-hmm. Was she doing too much? You can over-evaluate everything, when someone gets hurt, but it's something to think about, you know what I mean? And the field of strength and conditioning they've gotten really smart as to knowing when to place certain types of when to do your speed training, when to do your power and strength training, how to put it into the order of the workout and what's the most effective and what's the safest. I feel like the field's gotten pretty smart about that. But again, it is a fascinating field because there's so many different philosophies on ways to get bigger, faster, stronger, and recover faster.
Well, and just as this revolution has happened, I think teams have tried to account for what we've been talking about, the rep count or the work put in outside the facility can sometimes overwhelm an athlete and also create problems within their own program. So the 49ers, for example, I started covering them in 2017. By 2019, they brought in Ben Peterson, who had a hockey background, came from the Philadelphia Flyers. But what they loved about the background was that he was going to put everything, theoretically at least, under one roof. Right. So, a lot of the doctors, a lot of the trainers, strength coaches, all these guys would report to the same person, to Ben Peterson. He recently left, but the 49ers put Dustin Perry in, who comes from the strength and conditioning side, but he now has the health and performance title, which was created for Peterson in 2019, where everything's under the same umbrella. I know that they can't go out and deal with all the specialists that George Kittle or Christian McCaffrey might be dealing with outside the building. But still, it does seem like it is an effort, at least, to make as much as they possibly can uniform. And I know we talked about this a bit earlier. Yeah. This is a trend that seems to be happening across all pro sports.
It is, and it's really hard for the teams to control what a player wants to do outside of the facility. Mm-hmm. I know some guys in the NBA that it's twofold. There's players in the NBA that when they show up to a team, they tell the team, they're a superstar. I don't have to name any of them, but I know them. And they're like, okay, my guy, my strength and conditioning coach or therapist, I want him to be on the staff and travel with us, but he's just going to work for me.
Sounds like Barry Bonds back in the day in baseball. That was
So
a
there's a more of that than we realize.
okay.
You can just look at the Lakers, for instance. They've had a few guys recently. They could be great, but are they there to service the whole team, or are they there to service LeBron or Anthony Davis, who's not there anymore? So the Clippers have had some situations like that. I know some of the guys that work for the Clippers, where Kawhi Leonard came to the Clippers, and miraculously Kawhi Leonard's guy is now working for the Clippers. He's not anymore because he's had a lot of injury problems, and he finally figured out, I think, and I don't know this, but he probably figured out, like, hey, I should just probably do what the team tells me to do instead of
Yeah.
So that's, and when I was working with Terrell Owens, he was on the Eagles and the Cowboys. The Eagles, instead of, and I'm sure there's other NFL and NBA teams that do this, the Eagles brought me into their facility, even though it was Terrell that reached out to me. Terrell told the athletic trainer for the Eagles, at which point they didn't know a lot about sports hernia rehab. And so they welcomed me into training camp, and actually worked with a couple other players while I was there that had some similar issues, and just, had good conversations with their athletic trainers and their physical therapists about what I was doing with him, why they wanted to learn a little bit about it. And that was a very healthy relationship, because then now I didn't have to be there all the time. They knew, okay, here's T.O.'s routine. Here's what he needs to do before practice, before games. And they kind of understood it. And they knew it was working. So it was a very good success. He then goes to the Cowboys, and the Cowboys, he went there and he told them the same thing. Hey, this guy, they were just like, no, you do what you want to do outside of here, but you're going to do what we want you to do while you're here. And so that's when I kind of realized, he was bringing in myself and a chiropractor, I think, and outside of the organization people, putting us up in Dallas to work with him when he wasn't at practice. It might be in the evenings. It was not a great schedule. It wasn't optimal for him. And the team had no idea what I was doing because there was no communication there.
Wow. You saw two, this is a great case study of how two different franchises operate.
Yeah. And so, and that, again, that could have been how Terrell told them also too, his communication might not have been great. And I think with the Eagles, I think his agent got involved with that and helped bring that all together, versus with the Cowboys. I'm not sure if that happened. So he was, when he was on the 49ers, he was suffering from this sports hernia. I forget what year. And so then when he went to the Eagles, that's when I started working with him, and I asked him, I was like, so what have you been doing? Because he said, sprinting and running, which is pretty important for a wide receiver, hurt him a lot. And he had just had a pretty good season. And I was like, so what were you doing during the week? Because I would hardly ever practice because it hurt.
So you just probably get shot up before the game.
You just play the games.
Yeah.
And then I was like, and he'd had it for more than a year. It would plague them. So I was like, well, how about last off season? Were you able to do track work, sprint training, plyometrics? He's like, no. He goes, I'd lift. He goes, that was about the only thing that didn't hurt. So I then realized, I was like, wow, if he gets this thing corrected and healthy, and then can start adding, he was already a phenomenal athlete. If he can start adding.
He was basically not training.
He was doing great. He was at the highest level. And then, so then he got to the point where he could start doing his sprint training again. And so people were kind of surprised how much he took off when he was on the Eagles and the Cowboys, in terms of wow, he's getting older and he's getting faster. But it was because he was able to start doing all the training he needed to do.
And finally, Jim's connection with former Giants manager Bruce Bochy is a real special one. Have a listen to this.
This is my favorite story, I think, of yours. And you have a lot of good ones. But a couple of years ago, a client comes to you, somebody involved in baseball. And his name is Bruce Bochy, who 49ers fans are familiar with because they're also San Francisco Giants fans. Now, this is after Bochy had left the Giants, and he had a really specific request.
Yeah, I mean, he was in his first year of retirement. He was enjoying playing golf, and he, had a knee replacement, and he started talking to me in the fitness center saying, I should probably start working with you. And, so we got to know each other a little bit. And then a few months go by, and then he finally walks into my office one day, sits down, and is like, all right, I need your help. And I was like, what, you want to get in better shape for golf, or because I do work with a lot of golfers. And he's like, no, I got a new job. And I was like, what do you mean you got a new job? He's like, well, I'm the head guy for the Texas Rangers now. And he's like, spring training's in 3 months. I got to get in better shape so I can at least walk out to the mound when I need to take a picture out of the game. So he was committed. I mean, he was like an athlete, working with an athlete, even though he's, in his late 60s and has had many surgeries. But we just worked on him being able to walk better.
So this is a former catcher. And I think that when I think of the endurance things that guys have to do in sports, I think of the catching position probably as one of the most difficult. I mean, 162 games. They didn't used to get days off back when Bruce Bochy played. So he's in that squat. Anybody who's been in that squat wants to get out of it after 2 seconds. He's in that squat for 9 innings before there's a pitch clock. What kind of damage does that do to knees?
I mean, there's a reason why when you see a catcher trying to run when he's in his 30s, it doesn't look pretty. So yeah, their hips and their knees. And their ankles even, all of it, because it's just you're at extreme flexion in all those 3 joints. So yeah, it takes a beating on their body. And he's a tall guy too, so it's even worse. And then I think he told me about he had a motorcycle accident.
Wow.
So then he compounded his worn out joints with an ankle fusion and a back surgery. So yeah, and then even for coaches traveling in baseball, it's such a long season.
And most of them aren't sitting down either.
No, so it's a grind. I mean, yeah, you think they're not doing anything, but they are. They're out there on the practice field. They're sitting on the team bus. They're traveling. It's a grind on anybody's body, regardless if you're an athlete or not.
I'm sitting here and I'm realizing you have gotten to work with some amazing personalities. Terrell Owens. Then we talked about Kobe and how intense he was. Shaq is still one of the most famous sports personalities now because of how he's ported his success to TV. Dennis Rodman was on those Lakers teams too.
He was. I got a little taste of Dennis Rodman. It's super interesting. He's very unique.
I played darts with him before.
Okay. Very unique guy in terms of I didn't know what to expect when we brought him on. And I guess it was mid-season, and we weren't doing well, and I guess we needed a power forward, clearly, and I was expecting him to be this very kind of outgoing, crazy person, at least on the basketball court or at practice. He was super introverted, didn't talk to anyone. It got to the point where he, on a daily basis off at practice, I was the only person that he would talk to. And I don't know if he felt comfortable with me or whatever, or he's like, oh, because he liked to work out. So maybe he was like, well, this weight room guy is cool, but I don't know about the rest of the people. So he didn't it was almost like he didn't trust anyone.
Yeah.
So it was super weird. And it got to the point where he'd just come to practice and wouldn't talk to anyone and wouldn't talk to the coaches and just go hop on the bike and just I'm not going to practice today. And no one's asking me if I'm practicing today. And there'd often be one of the coaches would be like, can you go see if Dennis is going to practice today? Because I guess they were like, well, he talks to you. And I was like, when did this become my job? You know what I mean? Like, you're the head coach. Like,
The
go
Bulls,
ask 'em.
based on the Last Dance, they dealt with reminiscent problems. I don't want to say the same ones, where they weren't sure, is Dennis going to show up for this finals game, or is he going to be in Vegas? But he always ended up coming through at that point of his career.
So
right?
that's the brilliance of Phil Jackson right there. Is Phil was such an unbelievable. He had a great ability to read individual people differently and form a good opinion on what's the best way to get the most out of them. He learned that quickly with Shaq and other players on the Lakers. And a couple of players, like I remember when he first came on, because I'd already been there for 2 years, and I was like, why is he riding that player so much? Like, that guy would run through a brick wall for anyone. Like, he's one of the last players that you really need to get on all the time. And I think that was just like his initial evaluation of that player or opinion, because he didn't know them well. And then, but he'd pivot. He'd be like, oh, I don't need to ride that player.
So he would test to see what he has to do. And he was a genius. Obviously, Steve Kerr was on those Bulls teams, and I'm sure he has to use similar techniques with Draymond when he's managing his emotions throughout the course of the season.
And I've talked about this with a lot of people about Phil, because, he's got a lot of great books. I've read most of Phil's books on coaching and philosophy and whatnot. But I think his strongest skill, and I'm not sure it's something you can learn, was that innate ability to read a person. I mean, he had an unbelievable, like, he just first time you sit down with someone and he kind of like knew you really well in like 1 minute. So it was like this very innate ability to read someone.
Did that apply to you as well?
Yeah, it
so
did.
he is in tune with the entire organization around him.
The staff, I mean, I have a pretty good sense of sarcasm, and Phil was very sarcastic. And so early on, he would say something that, like, a lot of the guys would be like, oh, and I'd be like, and I might even start laughing. Like, he'd bring the whole team together, and he'd be saying some stuff, and the staff, the coaching staff and the trainers, and everyone was there. And he might say something, and then we'd break and go on to practice, workout, whatever we were doing. And I could tell a couple of players, like, he might have said something about a player, whatever. And I was like, he was joking, right? And they're like, no, that MF, he wasn't joking. And I was like, he was 100% joking. He did it with a straight face and didn't laugh, but no one laughed. And so, I would chuckle from time to time, and he would recognize that I chuckled or laughed. So I guess we always had a good relationship at that point, because I knew he had a pretty good sense of humor, but he was,
Well, there were a couple times when some of his jokes got out to the media, because he was speaking, I think, on the record, and the media obviously didn't realize he was joking, and he got into some hot water. So I know exactly the dynamic that you're talking about. You probably just saw it on a much more frequent and personal level, because most of that stuff doesn't leave the team building. So, I mean, these were glory years for the Lakers, right?
Yep.
And we talk about legends like Kobe, Shaq, Phil Jackson, Ron Harper was on that team as well. So there's some carryover from the Bulls.
Yep. Ron Harper, he brought him in because he knew the triangle offense well. And he knew, that's a classic example of a guy who was a step slow because he had a ACL. He came into the league. He was a high flying,
this is the tail end of his career.
But he had an ACL early in his career. Still able to have a long career. He definitely lost a step, but he realized he learned how to play without being the fastest and highest jumper out there. He just knew where to be at the right time and used his skill set and his mind to, especially with the triangle offense, to be in the right spot. And once you had been in that triangle offense enough, like, you really could keep playing for a long time. You didn't have to be super athletic. Phil really preached about being smart, not like being out physical or blowing by someone all the time. Just be smarter about where you're positioning. And go away from pressure instead of trying to go through pressure. And that, he really worked on Shaquille a lot with that. Where, yes, there was times where Shaq could just bail right through someone and dunk over someone, but there was times they're like, hey, let's try to find an easier way so you have a little bit longer career.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of big personalities, and we brought in a bunch of big personalities throughout those, three-peat and afterwards. Karl Malone for a year.
I remember that year. That was a year, the finals loss, right?
Yeah, finals
that
loss.
was a loaded team of older veterans.
Finals loss to Detroit.
Yes.
Who, we were just depleted at, love Karl Malone, but his knee was at the end. We had Horace Grant. He had an injury. So those were our two power forwards. Two great power forwards, great careers, but they were at the end of their career. And Detroit had Ben Wallace and Rasheed Wallace, who were in their prime, and we just got killed at that position. We had to end up throwing some rookies in that didn't get much playing time all year. Then they're playing in the NBA
finals. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember that year. That was one of the years where the Lakers were crowned before it was over, just because of name recognition. But you see behind the scenes, you see the guys aren't quite what they were in their prime. And there's a lot that you're dealing with.
And
at
we
that point
lost
of the year.
Robert Horry. He went to the Spurs, and he was a critical part of our three-peat, and was great in the triangle offense. And so Robert Horry, that year, the year before, I guess, he went to San Antonio. And then, so he was great in the triangle offense, very crafty, not your typical, like, super strong type power forward. He's more like today's type players where shoot from the outside. But he was durable, And so, he went on and got 2 more rings with San Antonio. He had 7. But yeah, that year, that last year, and then they traded Shaq, and everything changed. Phil stepped down from coaching. Who knows? If I'd known he was going to come back a year later, I probably would have stayed there. He was great to work for and under. He really let his staff do their jobs and did not micromanage.
He's a great delegator.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, you read these books about leadership, whenever but that was way before. All these leadership books are out there about, how to build a great organization. And, what I realized too is, because there were some coaches before him, it's such a long season. And if the guys on the team are hearing the same voice every day for 8 months straight, they're going to tune you out. So he really, really understood these guys' attention span and knew, like, okay, if I'm trying to get what's the most important thing I want to teach them today, and let's do it for 20 minutes and then be done. And then have another coach do something else, a different voice. So he really liked that, and I think that made the season more tolerable for the players, because they weren't listening to the same voice over and over and over again.
And you've mentioned it. Of these famous coaches start writing books, and they pass along their knowledge. Got one right there, Bill Walsh. He was probably the most influential football coach. I'm sure that Phil Jackson, and especially now, you already have some time in between the end of his career and the present day. I'm sure his teachings have started to trickle down to what we see now. He's got players like Steve Kerr, I mentioned, who are coaches themselves.
Yeah, Tyronn Lue.
Tyronn Lue as well. Yeah.
Luke Walton.
That's right. Walton played for him.
Brian Shaw. I mean, there's a long
list.
It's
the coaching tree, and that happens in the NBA as well. I mean, but throughout those
Derek
years,
Fisher.
Derek Fisher, Derek Fisher too.
Yep.
Those the locker room scenes, the stories throughout, some of the travel stories ahead of big games. I'm thinking those Lakers teams, the great series against Sacramento in the Western Conference Finals, right?
Yes,
that must have been.
They had. I mean, every year it was Sacramento was building their team, and they were getting better and better. And I think we faced them 3 years in a row. I can't remember exactly what years, but the first year was in the first round. We beat them, and that was back when they had 5-game series in the first round. And then the second year, I think we met them in the second round. And then the next year it was in the Western Conference Finals. And those were some good battles.
That was the Ori 3 game, one of the early games in that series.
Yeah, that was, I think it was a game 5 or 6. No, it would have been, they had home court. So it was a game 6.
In like game 2. So this was later in the series.
It was later in the series because I think it was a game 6. I think I watched that clip again. I mean, I've seen it a million times. And I remember asking Robert, because, Kobe goes in for a layup, I think, misses. Shaq has a putback, misses. And now the clock's run down and we're down 1 or we're down 2.
Yeah, you're down 2 to where the 2 would have tied it, but the 3 won it.
And I think it was Chris Webber. No.
It was Divac.
It
was Divac.
Just bats the ball.
Yeah.
Just wants to get it away from the basket. And it goes right to Robert at the 3-point line. I mean, he was just wide open. Boom. And I was like, what were you doing standing there? Like, you're a power forward. Why weren't you
need to be crashing the boards? Yeah, we're trying to tie the game here.
And he was like, I just felt like that's where I needed to be.
It just so happened that the rotation of the play or whatever happened.
Yeah.
But he still probably was in the wrong spot, but then it ended up being the right spot.
Yeah. And so, you get breaks like that. There was the famous Derek Fisher shot at the end of a game against the Spurs in the playoffs.
Where he had what, 0.4 seconds?
I think it was 0.4. That's a funny story because, we all had our little routines before games. Like certain guys wanted me to do certain stretching with them at the exact same time every game. So it was like I had my order of guys on the court. Like at the 10-minute mark, okay, Robert Ory. At the 7-minute mark, whoever.
So these guys are superstitious.
Oh yeah,
this is like next level superstition.
Like Shaq wanted to listen to the same, like in the little small weight room we had at the Forum or Staples Center. He wanted to listen to the same songs when he did his pregame exercises. Like after like a couple of years, I was like, okay, we got to go with it. We got to get some more songs here.
Was there a room big enough for Shaq in the Forum? I know in the Staples Center they probably made things a bit bigger, but I'm sure that he was crouching down in hallways.
It wasn't great. It was not great. We had to turn a little back storage area into like a little small weight room. They didn't have a weight room.
Have you been back there since they built SoFi Stadium right across the street?
I have not.
So you will really appreciate it since you worked at the Forum. But SoFi is obviously this palace, right? It is the essence of the modern stadium. It looks like a spaceship. It looks like it just plopped down there. Probably was trying to land at LAX and they missed, so they just landed a mile to the east. The Forum is right next to it. And the Forum, I'm sure at one point, I mean, it's the Great Western Forum. I know that was an advertisement, but still, it was a fitting name because it was this iconic arena. It was probably state of the art when it opened. It's about a tenth the size of SoFi.
I'm sure.
And it just looks like this rundown building. And they still use it for concerts and all that.
I know.
So it is amazing now when you see those two next to each other, the juxtaposition.
I would love to go into the Forum and see, like, okay, did they at least change like the locker rooms or anything? Because I don't think they play a lot of games in there, but they film stuff in there too.
Commercials and all that.
Yeah, any basketball scenes or whatever, that's probably their go-to spot to film something.
You know what they used to use, but it's not there anymore, is the old LA Sports Arena where the Clippers used to play. Yeah.
Yep.
But now they built a soccer stadium there, the Bank of California field. Yeah. So that's where the Galaxy play, I think, now.
Yeah. But the Forum was so cool to be, in there for 2 years. Just the history of it. There wasn't a bad seat in the place. It was a great arena. It was, Staples Center. Yeah, it's much bigger, modern, whatever. But it never had the same feel. Yeah. It never was as loud because it was just more volume to it and built.
And the clientele probably changes a bit. You get long-time season ticket holders priced out because I'm sure Staples Center did the seat licenses to build it.
They built, 3 levels of suites.
Yeah.
And they had no suites, really.
In the Forum.
At the Forum. And then the seats above the suites are so high up. There was no good, in my opinion, like middle of the road seats there.
Yeah.
Like, and for a person looking to purchase tickets, it was like you were either in the nosebleeds, which were still expensive, or you were
lower deck, paying
and those
$1,000.
were crazy. So it was a tough ticket for like a middle of the road
It's
ticket.
not just Staples Center. Chase Center in San Francisco, which is much newer, is the same deal. They came from a historic building in Oakland that was famously loud, right?
Yeah,
and then they crossed the bay, and it's pristine. You walk in, it's spotless, and the acoustics are supposedly perfect. But it's dedicated to suite holders and dedicated to the lower level where they literally have like hotel room like suites underneath the bowl there.
Yeah, Miami started doing that. I've been in Miami's arena,
and then nobody watches the game. The second half starts, and all the seats are empty.
So Miami, that's been going on there for a while. Like notorious for like you tune into a first half of a Miami game, and all these great seats that are really close to the court are empty. And it's because those are like affiliated with those like behind the scenes little suites, and people are in there eating whatever, and they don't come out to their seats.
See, so I have a buddy, a Heat fan, who got to go to Game 7 of the finals when they beat the Spurs.
Okay.
And he was telling me about it, and halftime finished, and they're in that club area because he had really good seats for that game, and he was like he's talking to some people. He's like, "Hey, I'm going to go and back out to my seat." And the other person was like, "Oh, I'm just going to watch the game on TV here." And he's like, "You're going to watch the game that's happening right there on the other side of the curtain on this TV, even though they have courtside seats?" And the guy was like, "Yeah." So if they're making that decision, I understand why the seats are empty.
It's a different generation for sure. I mean, it's everywhere, but it's people on their phones at games, and I'm guilty of it too. We all are.
Yeah.
And then you like start to think like, oh, wait a minute, what am I doing here? I'm here because I'm entertained by this sport. Why am I looking at my phone right now? But
it's unbelievable. And now the stadiums have to cater to the phone audience. They have to. They brag about how great their Wi-Fi is and everything. So you could be on your phone more effectively here than you are at home. So
I'm sure the football stadiums, fantasy football is so big that
that's why
people want they're there at the 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock game or whatever time zone you're in, and you want to know how your team's doing.
It must be wild to you. I mean, you were there through the Donaghy scandal that was centered around the Lakers and the Kings. And back then it was like, let's keep gambling away from the arena with a 10-foot pole or multiple state lines. Yeah. Now I'm sure Vegas is going to have a team soon. They already have teams in other sports. Yep. And we talk about this Wi-Fi connectivity. One of the reasons, like you just mentioned it, the leagues want it so much is because in the not too distant future, people are going to be making live bets sitting there. It's already happening in Europe. We got a tour of a soccer facility in Europe. You can walk to the concourse, make a bet on the game as it's going on, and walk back in. Yeah. And that's coming to American pro sports.
Yeah, I mean, the live betting on the apps now is, a lot of fun for some people. I lived in Vegas for 3 years. I worked at UNLV before I worked for the Lakers, and I can't remember the casino. And they had live betting on football. And it was unheard of. Like, it was the only casino, I can't remember what it was. And literally, you could be watching the game. Now, you obviously had to be a quick bet. You could bet on what the next play was going to be. Like, is it going to be a pass, a run, a
degenerate
completion?
Stuff, yeah.
Yeah, just like you could sit there and like you were there and you had buttons and you could put money in and I was like, wow, that's crazy. But, like, it had to be quick. But same thing now. It's just on your phone. And you're like, hey, what do you think the next shot is going to be? Is it going to be a 3-pointer or a 2-pointer?
Yeah, it's a wild times in sports. You mentioned UNLV. Yep. I think we've talked about this before. A little bit after Tarkanian, right?
Yeah. So Massimino, and then Bill Bano after that, and so they were still riding those popularity of the Tarkanian years. There was definitely, they had the money for basketball. It was definitely their number one sport. Football was secondary to basketball.
Now they get to play in the new stadium for football.
That's right.
They're playing at Allegiant. I don't know if the basketball team they probably still play on campus.
Thomas and Mack Center.
The Mack Center, yeah.
Which is a big, even then, it is a bigger arena for college.
Yeah, so that's fine. They don't have to play at T-Mobile. Save the UFC fights for T-Mobile. Yeah. Or they could, maybe one day UNLV will get a game in the Sphere.
Yes.
That thing looks
that
crazy.
Would be unbelievable. I've always wondered how, and maybe it has helped. I haven't followed UNLV football super close. They've done a little bit better. That the fact that they're in an NFL stadium, how is that? Does it help them with recruiting better than having a stadium that's kind of far off campus? Heck, even here in Nashville, I've wondered, they're building a new stadium for the Titans. Would Vanderbilt consider wanting to play in that new stadium?
Yeah, but the problem is that they would, I think the Titans one's actually going to be a little bit smaller. I think it'll be 60-something thousand.
Yep.
But Vanderbilt, it's funny. Maybe I shouldn't say they're not drawing 60 because they usually draw a ton of opposing teams.
When they're playing Alabama,
Alabama would fill up the stadium.
Whatever. So that's money. That's revenue. So I'm not quite sure why they wouldn't consider. I know they don't want to do that, but I'm kind of shocked that since they have the worst stadium in the SEC, it's not even a question. And, obviously when showing recruits your stadium, and they took a recruiting visit to Alabama and Tennessee and all these other big, beautiful stadiums.
And then you show them that.
But if you showed them this new NFL, state-of-the-art NFL stadium, it's got to get a recruit a little more excited. But who knows? I got a lot of great ideas.
It's funny because we talked about moving from the Forum to Staples.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure that Western Conference Finals between the Kings and the Lakers, that was already in the Staples era.
Correct.
But that was also still in the Arco Arena era. So the difference in arenas in that series, that must have been crazy.
Arco Arena was, at that time, and I don't know if it was always that loud, but that was the loudest arena.
Well, that had cowbells.
And the cowbells, and I think the cowbells became even more popular because of a Phil Jackson comment.
He called it Cowtown.
He called it a Cowtown.
Sacramento.
And then I definitely saw an uptick. I think everyone's like, oh, we'll show you Cowtown.
They took pride in it.
And then it was like, I was like, did every person in here get a cowbell on the way in? And we wore earplugs during the playoff games against them because, all the coaches would have earplugs in. It was so loud.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was like you'd have a headache by the end of the game. And then it would amp it up during timeouts. They were smart. There was a crew of guys with cowbells behind our bench. And during a timeout, as soon as Phil started talking to the team, they'd amp up how loud they were ringing the cowbells, and then no one could hear anything.
And that's a real home court advantage, I'm sure. Well,
for sure.
I wonder what Sacramento did to. They probably didn't have it as bad because the cowbells weren't right in their ears.
No, they weren't
behind their bench.
No, they were smart. They were very strategic with what they were doing.
It was hard to beat them there. It really was. I still remember those series, and of course the Lakers stole a couple games on the road, but still remember Bibby. Very vividly hitting a game winner. And they had Weber, Bibby, Divac, Stojakovic, whose son was recently, I think, at either Cal or Stanford. He was so that shows you how quickly time flies.
I remember Stojakovic, and they had Turkoglu.
Hedo Turkoglu,
who were there weren't that many foreigners in the league back then, and obviously these guys were great shooters. And I remember watching the two of them warming up before. This is before 3-pointers became the thing.
Yeah.
And I watched them. They were going around shooting spots, and I started counting. And Turkoglu hit 46 or something before I saw him miss. And I was like, wow,
that's Steph Curry level right there.
Yeah. And I was like, God. And the foreigners were really, because I think they just spent so much time in the gym. Because they didn't grow up playing pickup ball. They went to the gym and shot by themselves for hours probably.
It was like the AAU upbringing, except just by themselves without a team.
There wasn't, so wherever country they were from, basketball wasn't super popular. So they were but they found a gym, and so they were like, well, I can go shoot for 2 hours by myself.
And that's why those guys were the original sharpshooters back in the day. That's fascinating. And now Curry changed the game because everybody's a sharpshooter now, including the center. But back then, you're exactly right. It was always some Croatian guy or Turkish guy, some random dude from Europe that would shoot better than the American guys.
Right. Yeah, just light it up. But they were just getting the reps in. And now it's obviously, like you said, it's completely changed the game. And I'm not sure if it's for the better. Playoff basketball's, this year's playoff, it's better than the regular season, I think, because you'll see some teams now they still live and die by the three, but some of them are dying by the three.
Yep.
And then after the game, you can go, wow, if they had just shot half the number of threes, and then the rest had been twos, they probably would have won that game. So you're seeing teams realize hey, maybe the coaches are like, hey, maybe you don't need to shoot 12 threes, maybe 6 or 7. But they play that way in the regular season.
So they're used to it.
So it's used to it. And they're like, what are you talking about? You didn't have a problem with me jacking it up from 3 every time I touched it. So, I mean, I guess it's just a numbers game and an analytics game nowadays. I'm waiting for the day when a dominant center comes back, a Shaquille O'Neal Part 2 that nobody can guard, and see what that would look like.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the stat nerds, I think, took over the game, and one thing that fascinates me is that the corner 3 is now essentially a free throw.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't see guys miss, and if you miss a corner 3, and if that starts happening with some regularity, you're losing that game, because that's just such a valuable spot to be in with the line being closer there. But the stat nerds figured out that points per possession, we're going to score more if we shoot more threes.
Yep.
But I think that you're right. Because the training in basketball is now geared at the AAU levels for shooters through and through, also the training will also be geared at defending shooters. At some point, you're going to see a reversion where a dominant big guy comes in and his efficiency of scoring 2-pointers is so great that it will exceed the efficiency of the attempts on 3-pointers, right? Yeah. And that's how games ebb and flow. We're seeing this in football as well, in that we saw a super pass-happy era.
Yeah.
And I think now there's going to be a reversion to running the ball. You're already seeing it. The 49ers might have been at the forefront of it with a team that emphasizes running the ball, because the defenses have gotten smaller.
Yeah.
People have gotten more agile because they need to defend the pass. So run it down their throat.
Yeah, or get a big running back in there that these smaller linebackers can't tackle.
Won't tackle. So the NFL's version of the NBA's 3-point revolution was the air raid, the passing. Yeah. Yep. And I think that you're going to go back to the old school.
I hope so, because I think people were more entertained with that.
Or just a healthy balance.
Healthy balance,
yeah. Because if you go back to I would argue that either extreme becomes more boring.
Yeah.
So go back, and some of this stuff, it can be unwatchable if it's just a bunch of layups, the 60s and 70s, and guys couldn't shoot yet.
Yeah.
I think the 3-point game probably made it more exciting, but then you get desensitized to it, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's just, like you said, there's not, like, even if it's a bad shot, I watch a lot of these games, I go, that's a bad shot. They didn't pass the ball at all. They're 5 or 6 feet outside the 3-point line. And, they jack it up. And I was like, man, 10, 12 years ago, a coach would have yanked you right out of the game for that shot. And now they're like, well, I've seen him make it in practice 100 times, so I guess it's a good shot. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see if that ever happens, if the evolution of the 3, if they dial it back a little bit. Because I've had that argument with some of them. They're like, no, Shaq wouldn't be able to play in today's game. And they're like, well, because he would struggle defending. If the opposing team center was a 3-point shooter, he would struggle with that because he'd be away from the basket. But I always argue that whoever that player is going to be in foul trouble in the first 3 minutes of the game, and he's going to be on the bench because Shaq's going to back him down and dunk it on him.
I'm not very well versed in basketball analytics, but there's no team that's ever come close to averaging 2 points per possession, right? Like, it's somewhere in the ones.
Right.
So if you can't defend Shaq and he turns into essentially an automatic 2, I guess the hack a Shaq might be a thing. I think his free throw shooting would have to improve.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But, even when his free throw shooting was not great, he's shooting 50%. So essentially, the hack a Shaq never really worked. Because unless he shot less than 50%. Because if you're getting 1 point every single possession, that's like scoring 2 points every other position. That's like shooting 50% from the field, which is really good.
Yes, and especially back then, that worked. I think that offensively, the league, I don't know what the numbers are now, but I think he might, for it to work in the modern game, might have to shoot a slightly higher free throw percentage.
Because of the threes.
Yes, because of threes. Yeah, I have to throw in that. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert there, but it's fascinating. But I think that like if Shaq had lived in a different era, he would have tailored his game differently to make it in the NBA. I think that's what makes these arguments kind of silly, right?
Correct. So, because he thrived. I mean, like, he was getting, if you look at him from the beginning of his career, he got bigger and stronger. Like, he didn't get fatter. Like, a lot of times they're like, Shaq's fat, whatever. And yeah, there's times where his weight fluctuated. But at one point, I think when I was on the Lakers, he was 335 at 10% body fat, which is pretty good.
That's insane.
And
that's not just pretty good. That's not a human.
And coordinated. Like a lot of guys that are that big can't walk and chew gum, and he had great coordination. So it's like he was a freak. That's why he was a freak, because he's that size and he was coordinated.
Yeah.
He just couldn't shoot well from outside, but other than that, he had everything else you needed.
He's unbelievable. He talked about Bruce Bochy wanting to be able to walk out to the mound. This was after he had stepped away from the Giants.
Correct.
He ended up winning a World Series managing the Texas Rangers after he had worked with him.
First year, yeah.
It was the very first year, right?
First year, yeah.
So you're sitting there watching. How did the work that he did with you translate to some of those dramatic mound visits?
He got out there and didn't fall down. That was the only goal.
But he had to do it all the way through late October, maybe even November that year.
Season.
So he got his money's worth as far as...
I guess so. He didn't fall, and you know what? He felt good, and so we're friends still to this day, and he knows he doesn't look great when he's walking because he's had so many injuries. But to be able to last as a coach or anybody working in Major League Baseball is such a long season, such a grind that, and he's like a lot of these coaches get so obsessed. This was great about Phil too. But this is the similarities between Bruce and Phil, and don't become too obsessed with watching game film and obsessing over statistics. And we're like, you gotta have some other aspects of your life, exercising, reading, whatever. You can't be 100% on watching game film or analytics all the time, because you'll burn out.
Yeah.
And I think Bruce has a great appreciation for that too. He's got a great demeanor. He's very calm. And I think that's what allows you to last too. And that's the thing about another similarity. Phil was very calm on the bench, because you see some coaches are up screaming and yelling all the time. Well, you can't do that for a whole year. You're gonna have the
candle's
stroke.
Gonna burn out there. Yeah,
yeah, and you can't do that in practice all the time, because it's long season.
It might work a little bit in football, but even those seasons keep on getting longer.
Yeah,
and you have to, the 49ers schedule just came out, and they play the Seahawks in week 1 and in week 18.
Yeah.
The 2 divisional matchups. And I just looked up how far in between days wise that is. It's 120 days in between regular season games. If they reach their ultimate goal, they're still going to be playing for a month and a half past and that game. Then there's preseason and training camp before it. And then all this spring stuff that they're doing right now in OTAs. So even in football, which we look at as more of a fiery coach sprint, right? Yeah. Because every game means more. Even there, if you can't deliver some sort of even keel, you're going to lose your team.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. It works in college. The coaches,
because the guys continually filter out.
Yeah. It works, especially college basketball. It works. That's why people love college basketball, because they are more intense games. The kids are playing harder defense because they only have 30 or 40 games.
Yeah.
And then they're there for a year or two. So if the coach screams and yells all the time, it was good for a year or two, and then they're gone.
Yeah.
But when you're on a 5, 6, 7 year contract and you got to listen to the same
and you're
coach
making more money than the coach, I think that's the thing.
Then you're like, I don't want to listen to you anymore.
So it takes a guy like Phil Jackson, takes a true psychologist, or a Bruce Bochy, who was amazing with that kind of stuff. So, this ties it all together. You got to, in different capacities, you got to work with Phil Jackson and you got to work with Bruce Bochy. But I see so many similarities. Multiple time NBA Finals winner,
Yep.
multiple time World Series champion.
Yep.
Both, coaching in basketball, managing in baseball. Both really managing personalities
Yep.
with their gut in a
Yep.
way that may even be a little bit of a lost art now, just given the fact that we're moving towards such an analytics
For
age.
sure. And you hit it on the head because they, there were times where Phil Jackson would make a decision during a game and I'd be like, what? And most of the time it worked because he had a gut feeling. Like he might leave a player in that normally he takes out, come to the end of the game. He might go in, spell one of the star players for a few minutes. And then every once in a while you'd be like, wait, isn't it time for him to come out? And he leaves him in to finish the game. And ended up doing well. So obviously he saw or felt something, and it wasn't analytics driven, like you said. Very rarely did I see Phil Jackson coming at halftime and say, give me the stat sheet, like, oh, okay, well, they're out rebounding us by 7. That wasn't his shtick. And he knew the players didn't want to hear that either. But a lot of coaches are like that. They're like, well, they're 38% and we're 42%.
Yeah, they get too far into it and they lose. They play the game on the spreadsheet where, and you lose sometimes. There's the flip side too. If you're just playing everything by feel, you actually be blinded to some tendencies that do need to be corrected. Yeah. So I think the guys who perform the best. This goes back to I think the main point that I took from you. Where the guys who delegated the best, and Phil Jackson delegated because that is what covers your blind spots as a coach or a leader.
Yeah, and you gotta trust in who you're delegating to, and that's hence why you see coaches. Obviously, they usually, if they switch teams, they're pulling coaches that they know they can trust, and they can trust their opinion. When they walk in their office and say, "Hey, I think we should really start this player over this player now." Well, why? Okay. And then they're like, okay, we'll do it, versus saying, well, that's not what I see, so he really trusts his staff. And that feels good as if you're on that staff, you feel validated, that like, hey, I'm a legitimate coach. I mean, we had Tex Winter, the inventor of the triangle offense. I forget how old he was. Most players were like, who's this old guy? But he was true to Phil let him do his teaching about the triangle offense in a certain way, versus a lot of other coaches might have been like, hey, this guy's a little too old to be a coach still. Like we should probably, ask him to retire or something.
But he was still there.
Yeah. And so, it's interesting, as we've been talking, there are a lot of similarities between Bruce and Phil and their success, and their personalities have a lot of similarities to them. And there's similarities in their interest outside of their sport too.
Which enables them to both maintain a big picture outlook, which is, a coordinator, somebody who's a lifelong position coach or a coordinator in football, cool. They get sucked into their job and they'll be really good with their job, the X's and O's, but so many times you see coordinators fail as head coaches.
Yeah.
And it's because the head coaching spot cannot be so granular. It has to be bigger picture.
Yeah.
And you have to be the president, the CEO, the delegator. And I think the multiple interests outside of the sport is very correlated with somebody who can see a bigger picture.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be interesting to listen to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, let's face it. When guys are sitting down, hey, here, I'm sitting down at the film study or whatever, like, if you're someone who can throw a few jokes in there or, make an interesting comment about whatever's going on in the world or whatever, not just strictly X's and O's all the time.
Yeah.
A lot of those coaches are super successful because they have that ability to be multifaceted, let's say, in terms of their personality.